Hello, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. James here, as ever, for today's ACCA Taxation, that's the F6 exam video, where I'm going to walk and talk you through, as you can see on the screen, the External Examiner's Report for 2022, specifically looking at Section C, which in my opinion is the hardest part of the tax exam, where we're going to review the External Examiner's feedback from the two 10-mark questions and the 15-marker as well. The reason for this video, as you can see on the screen now, thank you very much F2 Gamer for your lovely comment on there. Sorry to see that you got 40s, but trust me, if you watch this video all the way to the end, the External Examiner tells us where students have made mistakes in the past and how future candidates who are going to be sitting this exam can pass it as well. So if you want to access all of my free taxation and ACCA videos, be sure to subscribe below. And as ever, thank you so much for all the support to the channel. Be sure to like this video so more accounting students can benefit from the content, and let me know where you're watching this from around the world and how you get on in your examination as well. But without any further ado, if you want access to this document before we get going, click the link in the description of this video. It's going to take you right there so that you can take down my notes as well that I picked up on when I reviewed it myself. If you haven't already watched the videos from section A and B, I'll link it at the end of this video as well so that you can follow it through. So then we had three questions that came up in the 2022 exam, the first being Fleur. And if you've never watched one of my videos where I analyse these documents, everything that's underlined are the key factors that you should be picking up on and that are going to help you for future examination sittings. So on here we've been told by the marker, the external marker, who marks your tax exam, the 10-mark higher skills questions involved Fleur. This is why I think Section C is the most hardest out of the three options. And it was a comparison between her remaining as self-employed and being incorporated. A typical Section C past paper question. And if you want to watch the video where I've analysed this question top to bottom, I'll link it in the description and at the back of this video as well. So you can try it for yourself, and then these comments will be even more helpful for you on there. But just note it down, a key question area regularly tested on the tax exam. We had tax and national insurance costs were actually higher, so incorporating versus being self-employed. And we've got to note down this exam technique that the external examiner is pointing out for us here, that typical for higher skills questions, read the question and requirements carefully, show all your workings, only required for 2 income tax computations, and also we were told that the workings being carried out at the margin, being given full marks in a full computation approach, and this is where such an approach will invariably take you longer. So if you haven't already and watched the analysis of this question, there were 2 approaches to take, but you could have actually just tinkered with a few of the little figures, and that would have been a much easier, quicker approach to applying this question. This is where we go into a bit more detail as to what came up in the question, where we were asked to calculate the 7 taxes and the national insurance, whether if she was to incorporate or not, based on an increased trading profit of 135,000. So follow the guidance using the CBE platform. We have the salary versus profit changes on here. Thinking carefully how to set out your answers. This is what the external examiner is trying to tell you now. The question was generally quite well answered, and the Class 2 and Class 1 national insurance figures did not change. So that was on the basis of staying self-employed versus incorporating to being a limited company. Finally on here, fail to pick up on the easy marks in Section C, students wasting time. That is a massive tip for you to get down, that when lots of students see 10 marks, they think, right, it's going to be really complicated. There were 2 to 3 easy, low-hanging fruit that you could have just picked up on straight away and got you closer to that pass on there. Key things to note down were, first of all, that the individual was over the threshold for abatement, so £125,140 on there, which is 2 lots of the personal allowance over 100,000. And in essence, what that means is that for every £2 you earn over £100,000, you lose £1 of allowance. So the personal allowance was sometimes not given at all, and net income being just 105,000. So we did have a few little adjustments to make there, but these are the things that you need to be prepared for in your tax exam. The next key notes, and I've put note this down on here, differentiating between income tax and dividend taxes, classic taxation area that you could be tested on your exam. And they've highlighted the incorporation alternative caused more problems, inclusion of trading profits in the computation was another issue, and did not apply the dividend income tax rates to the dividend income correctly. We also had, and be careful for the actual tax year that you're doing these questions for, because the rates and allowances can change. Nevertheless, these are the same sort of style of questions that you could be tested on. But we were told here that we had a £2,000 dividend nil rate bound counts towards the 37,700 basic rate band. The dividend allowance, in other words, contributes towards the tax bands for you to get down in your notes. We've also got on here, I've just put, see the diagram in the answer analysis notes as to the breakdown of how much we should be charging in terms of rates and then the nil rate band. So again, watch that answer analysis video. But other final points for the first 10 marker was, this is, again, please don't do this in your exam. Include narrative within your actual answer, but look how the external examiner is highlighting there that not good practice by some students was that they put most of the basic workings in one cell on the spreadsheet on the computer-based platform. And this is very difficult to follow for those candidates who put a whole tax computation in one cell, for example. So you need to space it out, go line by line, and give yourself lots of room and explain to the marker and communicate it, because the next point the external examiner has written down here was poor preparation and understanding, attempting to recalculate, and again, wasting time. So not understanding the actual requirement, poor layout, and simply missing out on actual easy marks, like concluding. 1 mark was there for actually saying what your answer led to. So plenty of good tips on there for you to implement in your examination. The next question we had was for Poppy, that you can see on the screen now. And again, this was a income tax question, so you'll be tested on, and this is a massive thing for you to get written down. In section C, you will be tested on income tax, so please expect that it'll come up. But it depends on what sort of style of income tax. So we had some employment here from Zoom PLC and also a member of a partnership. We also had areas such as a diesel powered car. You've got to understand the benefits of it being payrolled, and other benefits in kind such as 2 mobile phones and not meeting the actual emission standards. Partners always sharing profits and losses equally. So again, we've got some more further workings for you to actually put into account on there. But the next key thing to get down from the examiner's feedback, again, get this down, the 3 requirements were all fairly straightforward, so it was surprising that this question was not better answered. So in other words, students again were not fully prepared for a sort of partnership and benefit style question. And this is where we had for Poppy, that you can see on here, again analysing the requirements. First of all, we had some loss relief, total income, and this was applied to the 2021-2022 tax year, calculating the taxable income. The problem areas that you can see underlined in that paragraph where employment aspects were not, in this requirement, were actually answered quite well, but the candidates struggled to allocate the trading loss. So trading losses, get that down. Capital allowances and loss relief were also a particular issue. Along with the accrued gilt income also caused problems. So those are key areas after this video. Make sure you go away and do a bit of research. They've tested it once and they will test it again. We had the car benefits. Again, look how they're even identifying here. The external is saying 2 easy marks for car benefit. The 4% surcharge for it being a diesel car. But then some students incorrectly calculated or completely missed it or omitted it altogether. We had 2 mobile phones, so 1 was chargeable, and we had a 20% basis for tax, which was less well known on there because it is charged at the basic rate. Further points that the external wanted to highlight for us in section C, and again you can see the detail we're having to go into, where we had a balancing charge that needed to be added to the trading loss before allocating the resultant loss on there. So again, just some little technical aspects, but make sure you get it all down in your workings and you'll pick up on the carried forward marks, which means, especially in section C, if you've got an area wrong at the start of your calculation but carried it on through and you've done it correctly, you'll be given the marks as long as you're not putting it into one cell like we've seen before. Not realising there was a balancing event, but look at my notes on the side there. Follow the requirement what was asked for, not answering the one that you know. So candidates often wasted a lot of time by not restricting their calculation to just Poppy's share of the loss. So they actually calculated the other partner's shares of the loss, which didn't gain any marks. So if they don't ask for it, don't do it in this tax exam, because clearly the external examiner is showing that to us here. We also had at one point in time 3 months included for 3 directors and the remaining 9 months for 2 directors. So again, showing all your calculations, and note down these key terms here as to the relevant figures, the nominal value and the interest rates for when you have a go at this question yourself. And again, just showing your workings as you go through it. Then we also had for Poppy a 2-mark question and a 3-mark question. They've put on here, this was actually answered quite poorly in terms of income tax liability and the taxable benefits. And little thing in terms of tax rules on there. So the 2nd mark for stating there's no reporting on a P11D, you don't actually have to submit it, the figure would just go on your tax return. But always just state the basics if you've got a narrative question to get those easy marks. Because look, the external examiner simply said on here, for the 1st mark, candidates simply had to say that the related income tax liability is collected under PAYE, which is through a payroll system as if you were employed. Nice, easy 1 mark in the bank there for you. So just pop it down in your notes. There will be some easy marks in your exam, so don't miss out on them. The final aspect on here was not making the balancing payment. We also had, can you see my little 1 and 2 on there as to the interest and the penalties? So you had to break it down into where was the interest amount and where was the penalty. And candidates generally answered this correctly well, identifying that the 7 months late. The interest charge, as we worked it out, apportioned on there for 1.5 marks, but both are provided in the tax tables for the actual official rate of interest. So again, you've got to get familiar using those tax rules. And in regards to the penalty, we had 2 5% charges, one for being 1 month late and the second for being 6 months late. So again, it's just identifying the rules. But the final point here from the examiner from this part of the question was from an exam technique and guidance from the external examiner. And just look at the paragraph, I'll read it carefully for you. But candidates should realise that where a requirement is just for 3 marks, then no more than 2 to 3 short calculations or sentences are required. Answers should be related to the information provided, so a long detailed explanation of the interest and penalty rules in general is not going to score well. In other words, short and sweet, apply it back to the scenario and use the figures and rates that they're given to you. And think about it in your exam. If you've got a 2-3 mark question, you're not going to be expected to write paragraphs for that. Some great feedback, as you can think, going through this already. But we're on to the final one now. This is the last one for Mixture Limited. And again, for section C of your exam, key note for you to get down, you will be tested on corporation tax in section C. Corporation tax was generally reasonably well done, again, because people were expecting it to come up. They have to test it in your tax exam on there, if you didn't know that already. And we had on here classed as a large company, so they had taxable total profits of 470,000 and some dividends. So this is all about group companies and being over 51%. Key note to get down, we had 2 51% group companies plus the parent, so that is where we had 3 altogether, and we had to adjust the 1.5 million relevant threshold for actually, do we need to have them for quarterly instalments? Don't make any silly mistakes on there. So a few candidates base their answers on a profit threshold rather than the 1.5 million on there. And again, the 1.5 million is given to you within the tax table, so have a look to see for your particular exam to see if it had maybe gone up or gone down on there. So provided the 500,000 threshold was calculated correctly, the dividends had to be included or profits would have not been sufficient on there. So this is where finally the exception rule, although there is an exception rule, this was not relevant here because there were similar profits from the previous year. So they may not classify for the quarterly payments on here if they actually had very low profits in the previous year, but in actual fact they had quite high ones on here. But again, it comes with practice going through different styles of questions, But as always, the external keeps on telling us to make sure you read the requirement carefully, and notice in this requirement it was only 3 marks, but we had to first of all calculate, as you can see from my little 1 on the side, and then when will this be paid. So good exam technique on here, but it comes with question practice. This was generally not answered very well on here. But if candidates had not revised corporation tax quarterly payments, they might have been able to gain a half mark available through good exam technique. This is where the own figure rule applies. And again, we talked about it before, that even if you get the wrong answer, but you apply your figure correctly, many candidates included the dividends within taxable total profits. Again, applying your own figure rule. But we had corporation tax detail for you to remember, exam technique to adopt in terms of the little half marks on there. So again, if you want to pause the video to read it through in a bit more detail, feel free to. But little things as to a further half mark by stating the quarterly instalments are made on the 14th of each month on there. So just another tax-based rule, if you can apply it, along with the final mark covering the actual months of payment, but that did require a bit more knowledge. Coming on to the last bit now for requirement B, where we had if it qualified for capital allowance purposes, again another really examinable area in your tax exam, and candidates answered this section was actually quite mixed. So in other words, they either really knew the topic quite well or didn't particularly at all. And follow the notes that were in the actual requirement. So some candidates, it was often impossible to see what they meant to qualify and what was not. So again, have a go at this question. I've put the link to access the questions in the details of this video below, but many candidates didn't address the individual costs as requested. The whole figures that were asked for, they didn't actually break them down, and the fundamentals of the operations of the business were not sort of taken into account when they were making their judgment as to key thing for capital allowances: does it qualify for capital allowances or does it not? Do we capitalise it? Is it capital expenditure or is it revenue expenditure on there? And again, many candidates simply stated, but they were losing half marks by not making it clear for the marker. Remember, section C is marked by an actual individual, so I always tell my students, try to base your answer as if you were marking it yourself on there. That will really help you out. And that took you through as to should we capitalise it, should we not? Again, we had some walls on there, a new decorative wall around the boundary. That was actually revenue expenditure. It's not integral to the wall on there. You don't have to decorate it. It's still going to be the wall for the business. But the external examiner encouraging you to follow the notes provided. As you can see, the easiest approach was simply to list each asset and then right by the side of it, does it qualify for capital allowances or does it simply not on there, which some students didn't do. They give you guidance within the requirements, so just follow it. If you follow the guidance from the requirements, you'll get on a lot better. Finally, the last two areas of the actual requirements, C and D, a little 2 marker for C, again being specific versus generic. So rather than explaining when such an action is beneficial, not very many good answers in this actual requirement, but it's all about demonstrating your actual tax knowledge and short life asset key facts for you to note down that I've popped in the actual paragraph on there. So feel free to jot them down about increasing capital allowances, the advantages of actually accelerating those allowances, and then also the actual asset if it is disposed on there. But again, it's just explaining why a company may wish to make a short life asset election for capital allowances purposes on there. So we had the super deduction of 130% available too. The last area for requirement D, about calculating property business income on there. Again, rent receivable is on an accruals basis. The requirement was answered generally well, but there was a few key things in terms of dates on there. So another good point to note down in your exam, if you're actually in a centre, you do get a scrap piece of paper. You don't, sadly, if you're doing it at home on there, but if you're in the centre, you could actually write down a little timeline so that for the apportioning, you can see from my dates at the bottom here, you've got a really good chance of picking up on what areas did that 1,700 apply for example, the first 9 months, and then how many months within the period are we accounting for? Because there was apportioning in this question, and there's most likely going to be some apportioning in your exam as well. Finally, we were given some nice little feedback from the actual external examiner, so using the CBE practice platform and making mistakes. Again, using one cell for each area of working. So the examiner's telling you, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it, because many candidates included their workings for rent and the insurance deducted all within one cell for this question. It's not recommended. Break them up, make it easier, and then show the marker what each figure relates to. There are also numbers which were negative, so you have to be careful. It's difficult for the markers to pick up on these negative figures, as some of them are actually shown as positive. It's easy to make mistakes when you're trying to cram all those different areas into one cell, break it out one by one, and you're going to get the marker giving you more method marks, especially for section C, because that's the only part of this exam marked by a human on there. But that nicely takes us through the Section C notes for the 2022 External Examiner's Report, that if you pick up on some of these tips along with having a go at the questions yourself, trust me, that could be 5 to 10 marks in your examination. Just being more specific, showing your workings more clearly, understanding the requirements, and then developing your tax knowledge from a variety of different areas, but making sure you've got down those key points as to income tax, definitely going to be on your examination, and corporation tax as well. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's video, guys. Be sure to give it a massive like and thumbs up as ever. Thank you so much for all the support for the channel, and if you want access to all of my other videos, all you need to do is hit the subscribe button below and hit the bell so you don't miss out on any notifications, along with leave me a comment below what you thought of the video and any other requests like the F2 Gamer. I'll be more than happy to help you out, because as I know, it could be the difference in just picking up on those final little marks, especially in Section C, that can get you the 50 plus and get you passed in your examination. But as always on that bombshell, we'll see you next time. Cheers!